Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the latest installment in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, Leatherface. Not to be confused with Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, or Leatherface, the other Leatherface movie that came out before this, which was just a repackaging of some other movie. This is a official Texas Chainsaw Massacre prequel. The second Texas Chainsaw Massacre prequel in this franchise. Because one shitty prequel apparently wasn't enough. We needed another one. I don't know what the audience is or was for this movie. Because I can't think of any diehard fans of the franchise that I know of personally who were clamoring for a second prequel, for another film in the franchise after the absolute mess that was Texas Chainsaw 3D. But here we are with another film in the franchise. And in my opinion, this franchise needs to go straight to the slaughterhouse. It needs to be cut up, sliced and diced, and sent off to a freezer and never seen again. I really don't think there's anything else they can do with this franchise, because there's nowhere to go. There really isn't. They've already remade it once. They did a prequel to that remake. They've done a slew of terrible sequels already in Texas Chainsaw 4, The Next Generation, where you have Leatherface being a transvestite for some reason, which I guess he kind of was before, you know, the whole Ed Gein basis where he's wearing the flesh of a woman or something on his face. I get it, but they went way too far. And then they had like the Men in Black, and they had just a bunch of weird ass shit in The Next Generation, which I like to call the Next Transgenderation, because that's really what it is. Then you had the remake, which I'm not a fan of, but I'd rather watch that than Leatherface, which is more like Leather Disgrace, because this is just a continuing disgrace to this franchise and to the good name of Tobe Hooper. Tobe is long gone. He passed away this year, and the last film that has his name attached to it is this tedious, tiresome, forgettable, pathetic pile of fucking trash that is the Leatherface prequel. The second Leatherface prequel. And it's too bad. It's like he's attached to this film in name only. He's an executive producer. I highly doubt Tobe had any input or had anything to do with this film whatsoever. It just sucks that his name is in the credits on such a half-ass piece of shit like Leatherface. Like I said, I don't know why this was made. And apparently the studio who made this film did not have any faith in it themselves, because it didn't get a theatrical release. It did not get released theatrically, except like a few theaters, and made like $700,000 or something. So it didn't do that well at all. It made its debut on DirecTV in September of this year. It got a wide release on VOD and was released in some limited theaters, and then it just went straight to video. This was held back from release for a year by Millennium Films and Lionsgate. That says it all. I mean, they saw the finished product and they were like, yeah, I don't think this is gonna be something that we want to release in theaters. And you can see why. It definitely does not really look or feel like a theatrical film, especially from a storytelling standpoint. But then again, neither did the Next Generation, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre Beginning, or Texas Chainsaw 3D, with its stupid continuity errors that are just absolutely unbelievably moronic. So Leatherface is directed by Julien Maury and Alexandre Bustillo. And the direction isn't a total bust. It isn't a total mar. It's one of those things where it's serviceable. It's not a total dumpster fire, but it's nothing that's really that spectacular or that amazing. And that's a little bit disappointing when you have two directors. You have not one, but you have two directors working on the film, and their talents combined cannot deliver anything that is above average. It's just mediocre directing. It's just as forgettable as the rest of the film. The script is a total pile of absolute ass. Seth M. Sherwood really needed to hire somebody else to work on this script, because his script was not good enough for the film. For any film, really. This is a exercise in tedium, in pointlessness. This story doesn't add anything to the franchise. Why make a prequel that spends an hour and 10 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes of its 90-minute running time devoted to playing this boring, insipid game of whodunit, of who is going to be Leatherface? Doesn't matter who eventually ends up being Leatherface in the end, because you know how it's going to end. Somebody's going to be Leatherface. That's it. There's no suspense. There's no intrigue. There's no point to it. And it just feels like an absolute waste. It's just shit. Waste equals shit. That's what this is. It's shit. It's slop. And to quote the film itself, it's fucking trash. It should have been thrown away. This is the type of film that I would have been perfectly okay if it never even existed, or if it was never released. Because it adds nothing to the franchise. It doesn't help the franchise. All it does is hurt it. And this franchise has been hurt and has been put through the meat grinder ever since Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. And I personally don't think it's gotten any better since. Because that's the last film in this franchise that has been legitimately good, let alone great. The third film had its moments, but it was absolutely annihilated and cut to shreds by the censors. And it was just like a 90s reboot of the first film. The fourth movie was a ridiculous joke. The remake had its moments, but at the same time, it can't hold a candle to the original. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Beginning was a boring, forgettable prequel that wasn't necessary. That the most memorable thing about it is a stupid scene at the end when Leatherface somehow manages to hide in the backseat of a car and start a chainsaw without anybody noticing. Then you have Texas Chainsaw 3D, which is supposedly the real sequel to the first movie, but it's a total pile of piss and shit and garbage and awful, and it's an awful movie. And one of the most memorable things about that is the scene where Alexandre Daddario is like, "Do your thing, cuz," and throws a chainsaw at Leatherface because they're related or some shit. That film is awful. Okay, that's a terrible excuse for a Leatherface film, and a terrible excuse for a film in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Then you have this, which doesn't do anything except continue to curb stomp the franchise into fucking oblivion. I'm not even that angry at this film because I'm like, it's to be expected at this point. I mean, it's just, this franchise is fallen right through the basement floor and has been impaled on some barbed wire. It's dead. This franchise is dead. It's fucked. This movie did nothing to resurrect it. It did nothing to help it out. It just continued to put more nails into this film's coffin, which is frustrating, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, I guess I'm jaded at this point with this franchise. I'm just like, yeah, and with all the other shit, like with Cult of Chucky and things like that, and it just the film itself was just forgettable and generic. That's the thing about this. It's forgettable and generic. Like, it didn't necessarily, like, piss me off. It was just a generic, tedious, boring exercise in pointlessness. With some decent performances by some of the cast, some adequate direction, but a lot of that is completely held back by awful screenwriting and a terrible story. Because who cares? Ultimately, at the end of the day, who cares? Who cares about the past or the history of teenage Leatherface? I know I don't give a shit. Do you? So, and then the film also spends way too much of its running time with its script and its story relegated to a bunch of convicts who are like a poor man's natural born killers. It's like, what is this? Is it a redneck natural born killers movie now? What is this? What do these characters have to do with this franchise? Absolutely fucking nothing. So that just emphasizes how pointless this film is, because it spends way too much of the running time halfway through the film with this journey of these crazies that escape a nut house and go on a killing spree. And they're not related to the Sawyers. They don't have any relation to Jackson or Jeb or anybody. There's no relation to Chop Top or Grandpa or anybody in the family. So what's the point? Why don't you just make a separate film with these crazy, insane asylum couple and call it a day? No. We gotta waste people's time with this, and then waste people's time with the whole build-up to who, oh, man, oh, wow, it's such an unbelievable twist. They didn't go the obvious route and have the fat kid be Leatherface, or the bald guy who looks like a poor man's Tom Hardy be Leatherface. Oh, it's the pretty boy. I saw that coming a mile away. Like, miles away. Not a mile away, 50 miles away. It doesn't... there's no surprises. There's no scares. The best thing this film has going for it is some pretty good practical effects. There's some good gore in this. There's a scene near the end where Stephen Dorff's character gets cut in half, and it's done practically. I'll give the film credit for that. There's some, like I said, also, there's some decent performances by some of the cast members. Stephen Dorff does okay with the role he has to work with, but the character is ultimately pointless. It's a useless character. His character is a sheriff who wants to get revenge on the Sawyers for killing his daughter. And then he ultimately gets no revenge in the end of the movie and dies. Well, that was totally worth it, wasn't it? That character arc was totally worth watching and worth sitting through. Then you have some nurse named Elizabeth who works in the asylum, who the only character development she has and the only character traits she has, she's a pretty face, she has a crush on Sam Strike's character, Jackson, and she's nice. That's it. That's all that her character is. Sam Strike, in one of his first acting debuts in a feature film, he plays the guy who would ultimately become Leatherface, and he does a fine job, but his character... There's no reason why this character becomes Leatherface. It's not believable. So I'm supposed to believe that this character, who's a white knight, who's a good guy, who's portrayed as protagonist throughout the entire movie, protecting the girl Elizabeth, getting into fights with the two crazies, ultimately showing no signs of being corrupted by his crazy family, that he's going to get shot in the face at one point in the film, and then that leads to him losing his mind and becoming a total psychopath. That's the origin of Leatherface. He was some pretty boy who was a good guy, who had a good heart, got shot in the face during a shootout, and he got disfigured, reunited with his crazy family, and now he's ready to cut people up with a chainsaw. It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense. It's utter, total nonsense. Lili Taylor, I like her a lot as an actress. She does okay, I guess, as Verna Sawyer, but as a character that's like been done a million times. Why does Leatherface, why does this Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise need to have an origin story where a young Leatherface has a crazy mama? Why do we need that? You know, the first film didn't have that for a reason, because Tobe Hooper didn't want to appear like he was ripping off Psycho. He wanted to do a take on the Ed Gein true crime story with this character who likes to put human skin on, but he decided to put his own spin on it, and he did not want to have a cliched crazy mom being in the film for a reason. It's like this is about as stupid and dumb as the backstory for Michael Myers in Rob Zombie's Halloween. Yeah, he's just a typical abused boy with an abusive family. Here, oh, he's just a typical mama's boy who's being corrupted by his crazy mother and his crazy family. But it makes even less sense because he's taken away from that family, and he's been living without their influence for years, and now he just gets back with them, gets disfigured, and all of a sudden, I'm gonna cut people up with a chainsaw. Oh, I'm Leatherface. And there's something wrong. Isn't there something wrong with having a film that's called Leatherface? And Leatherface doesn't show up in the movie until an hour and 10 minutes into the fucking film? I mean, it's called Leatherface. And you don't get Leatherface until like 10 minutes. There's 10 minutes left in the film. 10 minutes of Leatherface. Movie's over. Before you know it, blink and you miss it. And it's called Leatherface. Why is this a part of the franchise? Why does this exist? James Bloor and Jessica Madsen, who play Clarice and Ike, they do a decent job playing a couple of crazies who go on a killing spree, who for some reason like to fuck corpses. I don't know why necrophilia needed to be in this. I guess they're trying to be shocking. I just thought it was over the top. And it just wasn't. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a horror classic. And it's a film that still stands the test of time and is scary and is creepy and is eerie and really gets under your skin. And it doesn't have a lot of gore, and it doesn't have people fucking on top of a corpse. It doesn't need any of that. Because it actually knows how to be unsettling and unnerving in a legitimate way. That it doesn't rely upon over-the-top visuals. That's why it's a great film. And that's why films like this suck. The cinematography by Antoine Sanier, not much to it. Editing by Sebastien de Saint Croix and Josh Ether. Might as well be Ether. Might as well be the air. What am I supposed to credit editing that's just adequate? There's not much to really say about the editing. The score by John Frizzle might as well have had Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus do the score for this movie. She probably would have done a better job. This is just a cliched, boring, generic, southern, twangy music that completely misses the point of this entire franchise. Yeah, but let's give the Leatherface film the most stock score imaginable. Oh, it takes place in Texas, in the South. We gotta have a twangy guitar in the background. It's just disappointing. You go from the score from the first movie, which is full of just weird noises and stuff, and is a very out there, out of the box score, and this is just your typical run-of-the-mill score that adds nothing to the movie in terms of atmosphere or mood. It doesn't do anything. And then the film severely suffers in terms of its pacing, because you have characters that either aren't very well developed, like Elizabeth, and even in a lot of ways Sam Strike's character. And then you have characters who are just unlikable. Even the sheriff guy's an asshole. He's your typical sort of sheriff who's wants revenge so much that he's going outside of the law and kills some convict later because she calls him out on his bullshit. Like she says, you know, fuck you, pig. You ain't shit. You're a fucking joke. Fuck you, pig. You're a joke. You ain't shit. That honestly could sum up this film. Fuck you, movie. You ain't shit. Fuck you. You're a fucking joke. You ain't shit. It's true. And Stephen Dorff calls the Sawyers in one scene early in the film. He calls them fucking trash, and that honestly is the best way to describe this film. I mean, the film is doing my job for me. That's how bad the movie is. It has multiple lines of dialogue where it's pretty much just destroying itself. It's ranting on itself. I mean, there's also dumb lines of dialogue too. Like Ike says this winter at one point, "Don't move. Don't you move. Don't go anywhere, or I'll turn you into strawberry pie." Strawberry pie? The hell? Really? Yeah, that's a great line. Yeah, it's extremely intimidating. But yeah, the pacing suffers because you have a story that you don't care about. It gives you no reason to give a fuck about it. Right from the beginning, it starts out and you have this couple who goes in and encounters and they see this kid. I mean, in the beginning, you have a young Leatherface when he's a boy who doesn't want to use the chainsaw and kill some guy, and his family's disappointed in him. And then later, the same boy is seen by the daughter of Stephen Dorff's character, and she sees him with a cow skull, like a cow head, on top of his skull. It was like cut off the cow and put on his head, and she's a fucking dumbass and follows this kid into a field, and then she gets captured and killed by the Sawyers. And I'm like, and that's, of course, that leads to the Stephen Dorff character wanting to get revenge on the Sawyers. And I'm like, your daughter was an idiot. Like, I mean, if he knew how she died, I think he would still feel sorrow and remorse. And maybe he wouldn't go on a rampaging sort of killing spree at some point in the film, because he'd be like, I'm just going to let the actual justice system take care of the Sawyers, because they took my daughter's life, but she didn't help things either by doing stupid shit like following some clearly crazy kid who has a cow head on top of his head into a field. Like, why did she even do that? He was like, he needs help because he said help me or something. Whatever. I'm not following some kid with a severed cow head on top of his skull into a field. I mean, I'm asking to get captured by a bunch of redneck killers if I do something stupid like that. So right the first 5 minutes or so, it's just absolutely just mind-blowingly dumb with shit like that. Then you got and then it just really fast cuts to like 10 years later. In this mental asylum, and you don't know who Leatherface is. Who's Jeb? I don't care. Why don't you hire Sherlock Holmes? Well, if you did hire Sherlock Holmes, he figured this shit out in 2 seconds. And then you have the crazy couple, Ike and what is it, Melissa? Clarice. Ike and Clarice, and they escape along with Sam Strike and the nurse lady. They keep Sam Strike and the nurse lady hostage. You have this fat fuck of a guy named Bud, who happens to be friends with Sam Strike's character. And I think Bud is played by this actor named Sam Coleman. And of course, during the crazy craziness that ensues, and the reason why they get out of the asylum is because Lili Taylor's character flips her shit and tries to find her son, and causes an opening for the crazies to break out of the nut house. What is up with these shitty recent installments in these horror franchises and them having scenes in asylums lately? You had Cult of Chucky that takes place for the most part in some kind of mental asylum or institution, and then you have Leatherface, which has a good majority of it taking place in a mental institution as well. They break out, they're on the run, there's a mini killing spree that happens in a diner, and admittedly, yes, there's some nice practical gore effects, but at times the film cuts away from stuff. It doesn't even go all the way. There's a scene where the killer, Ike, has a shotgun pointed at this waitress's head, and it cuts back, and all you see is just blood spray in the air. You don't even see her head get blown off. There's another scene where you see Ike himself is getting his just desserts because Bud's about to kill him, and he's beat him up, and he's got his head on a rock. He's about to curb stomp his ass, and it cuts away, and you just see an aftermath shot of Ike's dead body. It's just like, and then later in the film, Stephen Dorff gets his ass cut in half with a chainsaw, and gets limbs cut off, but you can't show the other scenes. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you taking this artistic approach to a horror film, a slasher movie? An installment in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Maybe you're trying to do your homage to Tobe Hooper, who didn't have a lot of blood and gore in the original film, in the first movie. But if you're going to have blood and gore, you might as well have all of it. You might as well go balls to the wall. You don't go limp. And then you have the inexplicable stupidness where the pretty boy, Floyd, gets shot in the face and then is all like, oh, I'm disfigured now. I'm going to grab a chainsaw and kill people. I'm going to cut off my would-be girlfriend's head and cut off her face and put it on my face and play on the radio, it's over. Now it's over. And I'm like, yeah, it's over now. And I'm glad this movie is over. So I don't have to watch it anymore. So it can stop killing my brain cells with a psychic chainsaw. But yeah, there's so many, this movie's just riddled with problems. Riddled with issues. Characters suck. The story sucks. The direction is there, but it can't do that much with such a poor excuse for a screenplay. It doesn't really give a reason for why it exists, or why it needs to even be seen by anybody, or why it needs to be a part of this franchise. It's just one of those films that you might as well just have watched a blank screen for an hour and a half. Because that would have had the same amount of impact as watching this film would have had on the audience that's watching it. So I don't really know what else to say about Leatherface, except it's a fucking disgrace. It's fucking trash. And I definitely do not recommend this one. I would say skip this one. Do not watch this. It's not worth your time. It's not going to do anything to make it worth your time. Have I seen worse? Yeah. That's not saying much. Oh, it didn't make one of the dumbest mistakes ever and make one of the most moronic continuity errors I've ever seen in my life like the previous film did. What? It doesn't deserve credit for that. It doesn't deserve credit for not being stupid. But at the same time, it's still stupid. It still makes stupid decisions. Let's make Leatherface sympathetic. That doesn't make any sense. That's absolutely retarded. It really is. Such a dumbass story. I don't know what the fuck they're thinking with that. And where are they going to go from here? Nowhere. Except right back into the fucking grave. or right back to the slaughterhouse. It's the type of film that makes you feel like you got beamed over the head with a sledgehammer after it's over, and you're in a daze trying to remember and make out what you saw, or remember what you just witnessed. I still am hazy on what I saw. And it isn't much of anything anyway. So that doesn't help either. So I got nothing else. I got nothing else to say about Leatherface. So just stop it. Stop digging up these old franchises, propping them up like they're still alive, like they're Bernie at Weekend at Bernie's, and puppeting them around with strings and shit, and parading them into theaters or direct-to-video. Stop making these half-assed, pathetic excuses for sequels, prequels, or new installments in old horror franchises. Let these franchises die with some dignity.